Greetings, this is Griff Ruby with another Isaac Asimov short story review. This story appears in If Worlds of Science Fiction, and at least the title is on here, Franchise and by Isaac Asimov. The picture, however, appears to go with another story, presumably this Birthright story. So, the name is on the cover, and of course it is also in the table of contents under short stories, franchise by Isaac Asimov, page 2. So it starts right in the very next page. Now, this story picks up with his second published Multivac story. The Multivac computer. Again, it was inspired by the idea that maybe that the 1952 presidential election had been tallied up by the Univac computer. And, well, wanting to go one step above the Univac, what would be the next and much more advanced computer? It would be the Multivac. So, well, that made sense. He'll go on to tell quite a number of stories about the Multivac computer. And actually, this may be the second one published, and I think also the second one written. But there's a previous one that, well, I talked about it in the previous section. It's very rare. But I felt because it's part of the Multivac saga, we had to talk about it in detail. This too forms now the second installment of the Multivac saga, though for many trying to go through Asimov stories, it would have to be like the first. So, and it's kind of goes back to the roots of this using for election. This franchise is about just how an election will be conducted with Multivac around running the show. And you don't go in and pull a lever or do any of the usual things that people actually do in voting. You get hooked up with all these wires, and then Multivac will ask the person all sorts of questions. They have a little bit of artwork featuring this. There's this one guy being hooked up to all these wires and things and ready to be asking all these questions. All these other various scientific, medical type people are monitoring every physical reaction of his and every other little thing you can imagine. So it comes with that piece of artwork and a little blurb that says, "It was a frightening thing to happen to a person. The responsibility was just too great. But Norman Muller couldn't back out. Multivac had chosen him, and the entire nation waited." So, illustrated by Paul Orban. Okay. So, we've got this election. It kind of has an atmosphere like Shirley Jackson's Lottery. We figure out who it's going to be, what particular tribe, what particular family, what particular member of the family, and so on down to the individual. And they think it's stoned, if you remember the Shirley Jackson story, the lottery. Well, in this case, you become responsible for the next election. As in, we reduce everything down to one single solitary voter, handpicked by Multivac, the greatest computer in all of existence. And we will see that aspect about Multivac in future Multivac installments. So, what do we actually learn about Multivac and how this would possibly work? There's a little description on page 7 as originally presented here. Let's see here. They invented special machines which could look at the first few votes and compare them with the votes from the same places in previous years. That way, the machine could compute how the total vote would be and who would be elected, you see? We kind of do something where, even before all the votes are counted, we may call it for this or that particular election, just based on enough statistics when we feel we get a large enough sample. Sometimes when it's really close, we try not to call it until we've really done the last vote count. But anyway, that's how it's supposed to be done. So it says, like Multivac. And now it gives this little Multivac history as applied to elections. The first computers were much smaller than Multivac, but the machines grew bigger, and they could tell how the election would go from fewer and fewer votes. Then, at last, they built Multivac, and it can tell from just one voter. And the little girl said, well, that's nice. So, now we get an interesting little glimpse of Multivac as a computer. Page 12. Okay, so Norman Muller was assuming that being chosen to be the guy who cast the vote, they would bring him to Multivac, and Multivac would do its magic with him, and that would be the thing. He's disappointed to learn, no, we won't be taking you to Multivac. Somehow, through all his depression, see, the sense of all this suddenly hit him. It's one thing, oh, you're so lucky you get to be the one. No, you're also the one responsible. And sometimes if people didn't like some of the ways these votes went in some past elections, they said some particularly uncomplimentary things about the 1988 election. But, your name kind of becomes a curse. But hopefully it doesn't go too bad, and okay, you can be kind of a hero, lionized as a hero, but also cursed as somebody who made all these choices. But all you really did was get interviewed very intensely by Multivac, and then Multivac somehow turned your answers to all these ridiculous off-the-wall questions into actual, okay, this election goes this way and that one goes that way, and for every election, large and small, all across the country, from the president down to, well, I don't know if dog catchers actually get elected, but right down to every single election, every ballot measure, every judge, every anything. He's there. Okay. But anyway, he's disappointed. He won't get to see Multivac. Somehow through his depression, he had still looked forward to seeing Multivac. They said it was half a mile long and 3 stories high. Well, the original story had it 5 miles. I also mentioned it was a quarter of a mile wide, but the half mile long, that at least, still there. I don't know why it has shrank. Did it get more efficient? As this said earlier in time? I don't know. At any rate, Multivac, chooses one individual. It spends all this time, they narrow it down to the individual, and you're watching it get closer. Oh, your state. Oh, your county. Oh, your city. And next thing you know, the guy's at your door saying you're the one that's going to be, and you're like, uh-oh. Yeah, my name's going to be maybe blessed, probably cursed for everything anybody didn't like. That's a huge and unpleasant responsibility. That's almost as bad as being stoned. So it kind of has a structure like that. But anyway. So they bring him in, and then they just do this at a local hospital. But there's a pipeline, electronic pipeline from there to the Multivac, which location remains secrets. Okay. So he won't get to meet it. He won't even get to know where it is. But he will be connected to Multivac and very closely monitored by these various scientists and medical people and so forth. Every physiological reaction as he gives these questions and answers them and so forth. It all gets fed in to the whole result of this big grand equation of what's going to determine all of the elections across the country. So he's doing all this, and it takes a few hours, and then it's all done. It's very exhausting, and they still keep you because Multivac needs some time to kind of assimilate the answers and make sure they all fit, and that it can really it's got everything it needs to solve every election nationwide. And in case not, he may ask you a few more questions after that hour, and then that'll be the end. Or in his case, the hour passes, Multivac's got everything it needs. There are no future questions. You're done. Thank you very much for your service. And he's allowed. And it just concludes with, yes, suddenly Norman Muller felt proud. It was on him now in full strength. He was proud. In this imperfect world, the sovereign citizens of the first and greatest electronic democracy had, through Norman Muller, through him, exercised. Once again, its free, untraveled franchise. Kind of an irony when you think about it, because this is really everybody but the one person selected has actually been disenfranchised. And that becomes a bit of an issue, when people worry about, a lot of different things that get done, in our election one way or another. So, all of those things said, the story also got collected in Earth is Ruling Up, its franchise. I could not find any discernible textual differences. It's a good, straightforward science fiction story. And it's just an interesting description of, wouldn't it be funny if, and then they did it this way. And then Multivac. How does Multivac make its choice? It may be a smart machine, but it's programmed by people. And you're going to tell me that those people wouldn't bias the selection of data presented to the computer in one way or another. What did go wrong back at the 1988 election, according to that story? It has nothing to do with our real world 1988 election. So that's all I have to say. It's kind of an interesting scenario, but most of all, this is now the second of what will go on to become a good many Multivac stories. Thanks for listening.